Greetings and welcome to today's webinar from Real Story Group. Excited for today's presentation on selecting MarTech platforms. Certainly a core of what we do and what we've been doing for the last 25 years as a business, and excited to have our founder and CEO, Tony Byrne, on today's session to take us through the majority of today's presentation. My name is Scott Dill. I'm on the business development team here with Real Story Group, and I just want to mention as we get started, Tony said there is time at the end for questions, so you can enter those throughout the presentation in the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel, and then we will be able to send out a recording of today's session in the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for that and from our marketing team. So as we get started, just wanted to give a little bit of background about Real Story Group. As I mentioned, we've been around for 25 years now, and throughout that time, we've kept the same business model. We never, ever work for the vendors we cover in any way, shape, or form. We exist to sit on your side of the table as you're selecting MarTech solutions that are the right fit for what it is that you're trying to do. The majority of our customers these days work with us in a stack advisory capacity where they get access to our research, they get access to our analysts, and also get access to each other in our private Stack Leadership Council. So if you're ever interested in learning more about that, you're welcome to email me or Tony, and we'd be happy to talk more about that private Stack Leadership Council. But that's enough for me. I'm going to turn things over to Tony to get things going today, and I'll catch up with all of you at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, Scott, thanks a lot. Love this topic of selecting technology. It's something we've been witness to and participated in for some time now, have some very strong opinions about. You see that kind of funny, jokey quadrant there. We're obviously making fun of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and it's interesting. I think more people understand that these kind of static quadrants, year after year, are really not very serious, not a very serious way of approaching this kind of horse race model. But it still raises the question, how do we select technology, and in particular, how do we select technology in an era of AI? How does it change the game? Does it fundamentally change the game? Certainly we saw for a couple of years there, I think really since ChatGPT sort of blew up at some level in late 2022, is that a lot of firms really stopped doing new technology acquisitions to kind of wait and see. And now that we know that AI itself is going to be kind of more of an accelerant and a disruptor, we see more and more enterprises coming back and saying, okay, we still have a problem that we need to fix with respect to email, customer data, web content management, whatever. And so we're seeing a lot more selection projects. It's just that maybe we need to treat them a little bit differently now in the era of AI. So that's what we're talking about here today. We always at Real Story Group start with talking about your stack. Architecture is such a critical discussion. Anytime we end up having any kind of discussion around pick your topic, AI, the future of data, content operations, it inevitably turns to a conversation around architecture. Architecture is really important when it comes down to selecting technology. So we're going to talk a little bit about really modernizing your stack thinking before you go out into the world and select some new technology, and then looking at what's the role of AI in what is increasingly for almost any major enterprise a composable stack. We'll spend a little bit of time sort of avoiding what we would call pre-modern approaches. In other words, kind of old school ways of selecting technology that a lot of enterprises still pursue. These are kind of anti-patterns that I'll just touch on briefly, but then spend more time on the fourth part here. What's a more modern approach to selecting technology that you ought to follow? And then we'll wrap it up with 10 key takeaways. That's mostly just a kind of a summary slide, so you don't have to take notes. We're going to kind of wrap it all up, and then when you get a copy of this deck, you can use it going forward. All right, let's talk about your stack. So this is what we call a MarTech architectures for the 2020s, where you have engagement channels at the top. Those are becoming more and more profuse. As you know, even now there are sort of agentic engagement channels. You still have interaction and delivery environments, and then you have engagement services underneath that. That's the first colored row. And that's where we've been spending a lot of time over the past, really starting in the 2010s, kind of beefing up our muscle and capabilities. This is a B2C version. There's a slightly different slide that we would do for B2B, but the concept is still the same. And we've been working a lot on these engagement services. The thing is that the future is really going to be more around customer foundation services. If you are going to do omnichannel, if you're going to support AI, certainly you really need to be thinking about what's your core strategy and capabilities with respect to content and information, data and decisioning that's decoupled from your engagement services, right? So that you can do it at an enterprise level. And that's really where you're going to be applying generative AI, insights AI, and decisioning AI is going to be at this customer foundation level. And so this is a tough news, good news story. The tough news is that you need to really get your act together at this foundation layer. Many of you now are working on it with respect to data. That's great. Many of you have work to do with respect to content and information. We can help you there. Decisioning is a little bit tougher. But the idea is you really have to get your house in order if you are going to be able to leverage new channels, if you're going to take a customer-centric approach, and above all, if you're going to leverage AI effectively. So this notion of customer foundation services. And so this then has some flavor or casts almost in some cases a kind of a shadow over any technology selection you're doing, because you really want to make sure in particular that any technology that you cover and that you're going to select in that middle engagement tier is able to work in what we call this legless world. In other words, that whatever platform you identify, that you can, it can get its content and data and decisioning, and for that matter, associated AI from these foundation layers. So we call this a loosely coupled, strongly backed strategy. The only way to speed and scale, as I mentioned, the only way to omnichannel, the only way to effective AI. And what this means, and we're seeing this already with more savvier enterprises that we work with, is a lot of your complexity, your people, and your budget is kind of moving a little bit south in your stack. We call this a little bit Pilates for your stack, and that's good. You need to be focused on that and stop putting all of this energy into your channel silos, right? Channel silos are increasingly untenable in this world. So where does AI fit into all this? You saw it as kind of a simple layer. There's obviously much more to it than that. What's happening now, and I think, Bill, your question, which we'll get to, kind of addresses this, is that vendors are just injecting AI into all of their platforms, right? So we're seeing AI as a feature, as kind of a tactical feature. And that's a reason why, honestly, a number of you aren't lighting it up, because you don't have the proper controls in place to deal with this across 20 different environments. But also, it means that the victories out of it are very tactical and honestly pretty moderate in terms of the benefits. We think that AI in a composable stack is going to be more of a layer. So let's first talk about this idea of a composable stack. The composable stack model has pretty much won out there in the world. And by composable stack model, I mean you have different vendors for different capabilities for the most part. So it's this idea that I'm not going to turn my stack over to a single vendor, let alone a single platform, because that's impossible if you're a sophisticated organization. Now, it's not an unreasonable strategy if you're a mid-market firm, and we work with some mid-market firms who have pursued more stack-in-the-box type architectures, which is okay for that tier. But if you're an enterprise, you're really looking at having a composable stack. This is when we look at the 30 large global enterprises who have been participating in our council over the last 5 years, and we took all the different vendors that they use, this is what it looks like. So the composable model really has won, and it's not even really worth debating, except that, of course, there are vendors who will say, no, you should get everything from us. And every now and then they're successful at persuading your executives to do this. You see the little nuclear sign there. You definitely, this is a highly radioactive environment. If you choose to do this, you don't want to do this. It doesn't mean that you don't selectively employ Salesforce or Adobe, or for that matter, Acquia or SAP or Microsoft or others, Oracle, selectively in your stack, but you certainly don't want to go all in with that vendor, however much they're persuading you. This is a big deal because now, you know, over the years, they've had different pressure points. Oh, you should get it all from us for better integration. Oh, you should get it all from us for better compliance. Oh, now they're saying, oh, you should get it all from us because that way you can have a unified AI story. And that's complete bullshit. I mean, the reality is that their AI is also embedded tactically into the different platforms and is not really integrated in a more cohesive whole than any other vendor. So you definitely want to avoid this approach. So as an alternative with respect to AI, as we see AI more as a layer. Now, you're not all going to get here right away. This is going to take some time to really manage AI as more of an enterprise service. But the way that you start with this is to really think about use cases. And so that's what we have in the middle here, which is looking at insights AI and decisioning AI and generative AI from more of a use case perspective. And then thinking, how do I string these together? We happen to think that insights AI is more foundational, that in turn drives decisioning AI, which is basically what you should do. And the generative AI, rather than being at the start of the conversation, is more at the end of the conversation, which is what are the different variants that we need to create to satisfy what the algorithms are telling us we should do. There's a lot to say here. We've had other recorded webinars about AI that you can look up. I just want to point out the responsible AI, which you definitely want to pursue before you do anything. Those 6 boxes there are a pretty big deal. These are decisions you're going to want to make at an enterprise layer. And this is why very often you can't just light up the AI feature that's showing up in all 20 of your different MarTech platforms. That's a lot of vetting you have to do. So it's all the more reason to really take ownership of AI yourself and think about it as a capability that you would inject into other platforms as opposed to a feature that you would light up within those platforms. Agent AI, we make a distinction, that's over on the left there, between workflow automation, which happens again very tactically within a platform, and much more high value stack orchestration, where the agent is working across platforms. There's a lot of potential there. Again, when we evaluate agent technology, we also use scenarios across various categories here. I won't go into great detail on this. You can't really buy any of this out of the box. You have to develop this, but there's a lot of opportunity here as you mature your underlying AI and as you mature your ability to manage agents to get some real value here. This is still a little bit more of a build than buy capability, however. If you're looking at agentic tooling, if you're looking at AI tooling, this is definitely an area where we can help you, and that should really be a selection project in and of itself. Let's turn back to sort of more prosaic but still important considerations. Let's say you want to replace your outbound marketing or email platform, you want to replace your web content management system, you want to replace, as many organizations are wanting to do, your loyalty platform, you want to replace your CRM, you want to replace your e-commerce, what have you. These are all still really important customer touch points. And so there are some anti-patterns you want to avoid here, which we call rather quaintly sort of pre-modern approaches. And there's at least 6 kind of traditional approaches that we still see happen today. One is love at first sight. And we see this actually with a lot of AI tools. You know, oh my God, I saw this great thing. One of our council members just reached out to us the other day that their CMO had dinner with the chief sales officer of an AI platform and thought it was fabulous, thought it was really interesting, thought it was one of a kind. And we're replying with a deck suggesting that it's not one of a kind. It may be interesting, but you know, these are the sorts of things that still happen in this world. And we're really kind of the MarTech team's advocate and saying, wait, let's just look at the truth here. But there still is very much this sort of love at first sight idea. The second anti-pattern we call really my cousin Vinny, which is, oh, this other organization or enterprise in our space licensed platform X, so we should use platform X. Well, it's always good to get trail wisdom, but just because something works for someone else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. The third one is really horse race, and so that's the whole Gartner Magic Quadrant Forrester Wave thing, which hopefully by now you understand is a complete waste of time. The fourth one is, you know, the dungarees that I have hanging around in my closet. In other words, I already have this platform, maybe it will work for this other use case. Well, maybe it will work for that use case if it's yard work. If you're going to be stepping out to a cocktail party, maybe it's not quite the clothes you want to be wearing. So again, use case becomes so important. Then, of course, we sometimes still see either the marketing team or the IT team or the data team picking MarTech platforms just themselves, when really you want all 3 of those stakeholders involved. and make sure that it's not someone else's problem, but that collectively you're working on it. The sixth anti-pattern is really, in a way, the most pernicious, which is you come up with these long spreadsheets of requirements and you try to prioritize them, and most of them end up being prioritized one or two, and it becomes a very bloodless mathematical exercise that takes humans out of the equation and often takes business value out of the equation. You really don't want to do that. What you want is a much more use case driven sort of approach. And then, this whole process, any of these legacy processes become so frustrating at the end, somebody says, we just got to do it. Let's just, operate on a wing and a prayer. Maybe it doesn't even make a difference which technology we use. And you really don't want to be doing that, especially with AI tools. So what's the alternative? The alternative is a more modern approach to selection. We wrote a book about this called The Right Way to Select Technology. Scott can get you a copy of that book. It's really around applying design thinking to this whole effort rather than using kind of traditional waterfall methods. So it's business focused, it's outcome focused, it's inevitably team based, which is really what MarTech is all about. It's very empirical, in other words, test based, and it's iterative and adaptive, which means that rather than having a demo and then feeling all anxious about that decision, you go through a series of filtration steps where you become increasingly aware of a smaller number of vendors and how they'll work for you. It allows you to adapt and iterate your requirements and really make a good choice. So design thinking, I think you probably all know what the precepts of it. A lot of you use it in your marketing and and digital experiences that you do for customers. What we sometimes are surprised is enterprises not using this on themselves, essentially, in terms of the capabilities that they're going to bring into the enterprise. And so whenever you're selecting tools, we suggest that you do this sort of empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test before you sign any kind of contract. So what does that look like? We have this inverted triangle where first you create diverse user stories. This is the most important thing that you'll do. User stories will be, user is carrying a lot of load here. Users are, of course, your customers and prospects, but also any people who will be upstream or actually using the marketing platform itself. So you need to involve all of those. A good user story actually involves both customers and your own internal colleagues. You go through a definition process where you create some sort of RFP and a vendor shortlist. That can be then combined with the ideation step, which is reviewing the proposals and demos. Definitely, I'm lingering here on the dark orange part of the triangle. Always have a hands-on bake-off between two finalists. You can do this with even very sophisticated platforms like dynamic content optimization for paid media or customer data platforms. You can always do a hands-on bake-off, and this is really where you learn what the platform wants to do naturally and what you're going to have to fight with. You're going to learn what the vendor really cares about as opposed to what they say they care about. Then, while you're negotiating a contract, and unfortunately that will take anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, depending on your organization and the vendor, use that period, whether it's 6 weeks or 6 months or something in between, to then do a one vendor POC where you continue to test. And in that way, when the contract is signed, you're really understanding what are the true merits and demerits of the platform. What does it really do well? What does it not do well? And then you can, first of all, ink a better contract, but secondly, really get off the gate much faster with a really solid pilot. It's also going to help you understand what are the process changes that we need to make. And this has always been important, right? Really understanding how do we need to change as an organization to leverage this new or upgraded technology. That's always been a big deal, right? You know that. It's an especially big deal in an AI world because AI really, for the value that you see and the exciting use cases and the dramatic improvements that vendors will show you, which to be sure can be very episodic, a lot of them underneath the covers imply that you're doing a lot of changes to your business process, that you're introducing new roles. And so both the bake-off process and a POC before you sign a contract really help you understand what are these new processes we're going to need to do, what are these new roles we're going to need. I would say, the process is important, and the roles are one of the things that really surprise people with AI about, that they need graph modelers, that they need taxonomists, that you're going to need people who are totally dedicated on monitoring guardrails. You're going to need people who are totally dedicated on contextual inputs, which will make or break any insights, decisioning, and especially generative project that you're going to have. It's going to be the value of the contextual inputs and the way that you're constantly iterating on those. It's going to be so important for you. So, the sorts of roles that you need to be successful is so important. We can advise you about that in advance. We can advise you about a lot of this stuff in advance, but to actually see and feel it yourselves in your own environment, that's true gold. And so our mission would be to really set you up so that you can have as faithful an experience about what this is going to be like, and you get more value from the platform sooner. Okay. So always, always, always do a bake-off. Okay, let's review some takeaways, some of which I think have been implied in our conversation, and now I'm going to make them more explicit. The other thing that we're going to have time for here is any questions that you might have, any vignettes you'd like to share, anything maybe you disagree with. Feel free to use the questions tab, which is in your GoToWebinar control panel. And there's too many of you on the line, we can't unmute you, but if you would just type some in, for sure we're going to have time to get to that. All right, let's look at the takeaways. So get clear about your stack. What is your stack today? And if you don't have a roadmap, you really need a roadmap going forward, because there are some tectonic changes happening. They were happening even before AI, and now AI is accelerating those changes. And so now more than ever, you really need to think about what your stack might look like in 2030, and therefore, how is that going to circumscribe what we need or demand what we are going to need from any particular platform. One of the things that we're really excited about, by the way, at Real Story Group is that you can get lighter at the engagement tier. In other words, if you have your foundation set, really solidly, or at least you're on a path to do that, your email platform, your web content management system, your e-commerce system doesn't need to be as sophisticated anymore. It can be a much lighter platform because it's getting a lot of its key data, content, and instructions from somewhere else in your environment. And that's really the future. So really being able to plan for a world where, for example, your email platform is no longer managing any customer data is definitely what you want to be thinking about. So that's number one. Number two, of course, get clear about your business case. Everything depends on your business case. Even if you're replacing some technology, you need to have some business goals that you're driving towards. And the reason for that is that technology selection is always about trade-offs. And at some point, we're going to get down to a conversation that me or one of my colleagues is going to have with your team that's going to say, on the one hand, this vendor does that. On the other hand, this other platform does X. And so the business case really becomes your kind of Rosetta Stone against which you then compare and contrast these sorts of trade-offs. Which ones are important and which ones aren't. So it really helps you discern between two potentially promising vendors, but one is going to be more promising, and that's going to depend on your business case. And then, of course, related to that is making sure that you put together a cross-departmental selection team. Never default to an incumbent vendor in your stack. Never do this. Now, that doesn't mean that you exclude them from the selection process, but what it means is they have to prove themselves out the same way that everyone else will. They will squeal and squawk and go to your leadership and say, this is unfair, you're being unreasonable, you're being mean to them. How could you damage your relationship like this? I thought we were married and you're telling us it's your love is conditional. They'll pull out all kinds of stops, but you need to really hold firm here, because it's very often the case that an incumbent vendor is not the best solution. Just because they provide excellent web content management doesn't mean that they should be your testing platform, or they should be your email platform, or your e-commerce platform, and vice versa. Again, you want to center your RFI, RFP, RFQ, RFD, whatever your RF or tender, many people call it, whatever it is that you're putting out there. You want to center it on people-oriented use cases. This is technology being used by humans for humans, even if it's involving a lot of AI automation, even if it has agents. At the end of the day, this is to empower and enable your humans to provide a better experience for other humans, and so you need to have human-centered use cases. Don't fixate on embedded AI services. In many cases, you won't be able to light them up because you're not going to have the time or resources to vet them. In any case, these are features. You really want to prepare for a long-term where AI and agentic are layers. You may not get there right away, but you want to be ready for that world. When you get into the nuts and bolts of the selection process, which we can definitely help you with, you want to follow an adaptive model that focuses on iteration and learning. The best requirements are never perfect. Even if you're already replacing something, in some cases, we're helping an organization get on their third generation of something because they've had it for 20 years and every 7 years they've needed to change it, or every 10 years. Your requirements are never going to 100% capture what you need and may not survive actually being confronted with reality. And so reality means actually testing. And so you want to be able to iterate and learn. Don't skip that bake-off. The other thing about the bake-off and this whole iterative process, it allows you to negotiate early and often. You are probably not experts in negotiating with vendors. Vendors are experts in negotiating with you. And so there's an asymmetry there. And what we want to do is to help you balance out that asymmetry so that you're on at least an even keel. And remember, it's you who are paying for this. So you should have the upper hand here. Start by negotiating early and often. Definitely can help guide you to success. That can look at different ways for different enterprises, but whoever you are, feel free to drop us a line, and our mission in life is to make you successful. So with that, I'll let Scott tell you about potential next steps and how he mentioned emailing. Here's how you can get a hold of us. And why don't you do that, Scott, while I quickly preview some of the questions that have come in.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I'm going to echo what Tony just said about having RSG on your side. We're here to help you navigate this ever-changing landscape. And when you work with us, you get access to the whole team, right? So Tony and the rest of our principal analysts are here to help you make these difficult choices and make sure you're making the right choices for your organization and you're optimizing your MarTech stack. So reach out to us anytime. Happy to take this in terms of a one-on-one conversation and have that with you. In terms of webinars, we have another one coming up later this month, April 29th, on the future of personalization. So really great to see you on that one as well. And with that, I do see some questions have come in. Tony, are you seeing those?
Yeah, so the first one is from Bill, and he's really kind of jumping very quickly on a point I made early in our session today, which is you have AI from these vendors at the engagement tier. So how can you build customer AI at the foundation level? And the idea here is that the value in AI, we know, increasingly comes from the value of the content and the data and the logical boundaries and contexts that you're going to be putting into it. So those three foundations, pillars that we talked about, are really what's going to differentiate you here, and that ought to be driving your AI, not the very localized data, the localized content, and the localized decisions that are within, say, a loyalty platform. Any kind of AI that they're going to light up for you is necessarily going to be fairly ignorant and therefore not particularly effective, therefore more prone to hallucination. And what they'll tell you is, well, just feed us all this stuff. And then at a certain point, you're doing all of this work separately within your different silos of feeding them all this context, more and more context, that you really ought to do more at a more foundational level. Chad, good to see you. You're asking, when embedded AI is updating faster than your vendor contracts, how do you buy for capability today without looking in obsolescence tomorrow? Yeah, I mean, this is a really critical point, and I would say the same thing about architectures too, Chad. And it's not a simple thing to answer. I think in the roadmaps that we've been doing around AI and agentic is to really focus on your foundational capabilities, building up your internal expertise so that you can get the value out of this. There's an enormous opportunity here for you to spend less on vendors, less on integrators, less on agencies, and yet still move faster and more effectively. And so that's very exciting, but you're going to have to kind of step your way there. And so a lot of this is really getting comfortable around enterprise-wide, tapping into enterprise-wide agreements around LLMs and other capabilities so that you can then leverage the latest and greatest and not depend on your WCM vendor is going to be, innovating like they should, because they probably can't keep up. Kelly is asking, how does the selection model help leaders understand that AI readiness isn't just a technology decision, but a change management and operating model shift? Yeah, that's a great question, Kelly. I think, a selection project in and of itself is only going to do that to a certain extent. Obviously, if we stepped into an environment where that was really critical, that would be part and parcel of what we would recommend, including potentially the need to budget for and bring in other consultancies or other organizations to help you with essential prep work in lieu of, or prior to, or in addition to, getting a new integrated software vendor or ISV. The other thing that's really interesting, Kelly, is that when you start doing your own demos of your own use cases and your own bake-offs of your own use cases, and you invite selectively leadership into this, they can see for their own eyes that you're not fully ready for this, that the technology is cool, there's interesting outputs, but they'll be able to see for themselves, oh, we're going to need XYZ. We're going to need to clean up and unify our data. We're going to need to have an enterprise taxonomy model above our content. We're going to need to establish some point of discernment and prioritization of all the different decision logic that we're going to have. All these kind of basics that are really important to be able to show that to them in the context of some sort of prototype where there's hands-on, we find is really powerful. It's still not necessarily, Kelly, a guarantee that you'll get where you need to go, but anything that they can see with their own eyes and really be able to understand, and where you can explain that the vendor alone is not going to get you there, is really helpful rather than a more abstract conversation. So. All right, folks, we've passed our 30-minute barrier here, but we had some great questions. Always great to see you. Look forward to staying in touch. Feel free to connect with us. Any of the coordinates on the screen. So for my colleague, Scott Dill, this is Tony Byrne signing off from Real Story Group. See you next time.